All right, so I see we still have a couple of people dropping in, but I'm going to go ahead and get started. So I want to welcome everyone to our final ECONnections webinar for 2021. My name is Alexandria Hombacher, and I work at the Cleveland Fed as a manager in our education and outreach department. And today I'm going to be serving as one of your co-hosts. Joining me for my co-hosting duties is my colleague Chris Bertelson, who's the Economic Education Specialist at the St. Louis Fed. So Chris is going to be facilitating our Q&A today. So for those joining us for the first time, the Fed's Classroom ECONnections webinar series allows educators from across the country to connect with economic and personal finance education experts from the Federal Reserve System to hear about and discuss content and materials for improving classroom instruction in personal finance and economics. The session topics vary and are of interest to K-12 educators and administrators. All of our sessions are free, but we do require registration. So before we get started, I just have a couple of housekeeping things I want to review. As I mentioned, we will be doing a Q&A with our audience at the end of the presentation. So if you would like to ask a question of one of our presenters, please post it in the chat. And Chris will be gathering all of these questions and, as I said, facilitating that at the end of the presentations. Also, we will be posting relevant links in the chat, so please make sure you keep an eye on that for when you see resources come up. And then without further ado, I'm going to go ahead and introduce our presenters for today. So we have Asia Thomas, who's a Senior Communications Specialist for the U.S. Currency Education Program at the Board of Governors. We also have Gigi Wolf, who is the Lead Econ Ed Specialist at the Kansas City Fed. And of course, we've got Morgan Ackley, who is joining us from the Dallas Fed as an outreach advisor. So today they're going to be presenting on Black banking, currency, and the U.S. banking system. Now, as with all Fed events, I'd just like to put our disclaimer out there that the views presented in this webinar are those of the presenters and not necessarily the views of the Federal Reserve's banks of Atlanta, Cleveland, Dallas, Kansas City, St. Louis, or the Federal Reserve System. So I'm going to go ahead and turn it over to our first presenter.
Zan, can everyone hear me? Perfect.
I can hear you.
Perfect. Hello, everyone. Again, my name is Asia Thomas. I'm a Senior Communications Specialist here at the Federal Reserve Board. Today, I will be talking to you about the U.S. Currency Education Program and the resources that we have available for educators. Okay, moving down to my next slide. So the U.S. Currency Education Program, or the CEP. Who are we? What do we do? So we are part of the Federal Reserve Board. We support the board's goal of educating a global public on the security and design features of U.S. currency. We also enhance counterfeit deterrence capabilities through education. Primarily, we work with our colleagues throughout the Federal Reserve System, as well as at the U.S. Secret Service and the Treasury's Bureau of Engraving and Printing, to create a number of free online and in-person training and educational resources. Speaking of those resources, I want to bring our attention to uscurrency.gov. So later in the presentation, I will certainly be talking about our youth ed materials that are targeted specifically towards elementary and middle school students. However, I first wanted to introduce you all to our website and a few general resources that we have available for all ages. So first and foremost are our download and order materials. So these are your brochures, your posters, your tent cards that highlight different aspects about money. They'll highlight different denominations or values of currency. So we have some resources that may only talk about the $20 note, others that may only speak about the $100 note or $100 bill, and then others that touch on each denomination of U.S. currency. So it's really a broad range of items depending on what you really want to find more information about. With our download materials, they are available in over 20 languages. You could download those, print them immediately, and have them at your disposal. Also, you can order materials and we'll ship anywhere in the world free of charge. And that is something I want to bring up about all of our materials. Everything is free. If you need anything, it is accessible. You don't have to pay for any of the resources that are on uscurrency.gov or any of our services for that matter. So yes, with the order materials, you can order those and they are all available in English and in Spanish, as is our entire website, uscurrency.gov is fully accessible in English and in Spanish. Next, I want to bring your attention to the online training module. So this wasn't created specifically for high school students. However, I do think that this is a really great resource for high school students who are just entering the job market, especially if they are becoming professional cash handlers, perhaps as a retailer or a cashier. This resource will really familiarize them with the security and design features of U.S. currency and teach them how to authenticate U.S. currency. So it's a self-guided training module. It takes about 20 minutes to complete. It goes through each denomination and touches on the different security features for each denomination. And then at the end, it just provides a few quick, easy ways to quickly and discreetly authenticate U.S. currency. Next, we have our history page, which shows how American history has shaped the way we design, issue, and process modern banknotes. It's a pretty text-heavy page, so I would say this is probably for older students as well, but again, it's available for all ages. If you don't want something that's so text-heavy, you can check out our videos. They are on our website as well as on YouTube. We have animated videos, live videos. Similarly, if you're interested in learning more about currency on the go, you can check out our Noteworthy podcast series, where we cover a number of fun money-related topics, from the mystery behind the $2 bill to what happens at the end of the life cycle of U.S. currency. And then last but not least, I did want to highlight our Multimedia Library. We just released this year on our website. This is really where you would go if you find something on our website, such as an image that you would like to use in your classroom and you want to download it. You could go to our Multimedia Library, download it, high-res images, and you should be good to go. So with that, I will touch more on our specific youth education material. So first and foremost, cash code breakers. This is something I'm very excited to highlight, as this is our newest youth ed material. So new that we just released it a few days ago, and we haven't actually publicly disclosed it yet. So you guys are getting exclusive information here at the webinar. So with cash code breakers, what is it? So this is a digital escape room that was designed for middle schoolers, specifically 6th through 8th graders. In this, students must solve algebra problems and currency-related puzzles to crack a code and escape out of a fictional money museum. There are two modes within the cash code breakers. We have a regular mode where students can select their difficulty level, level 1 being the easiest, level 3 being the hardest. And then we have a classroom mode where teachers can go in and select what levels and questions they want the entire class to work on together. So we do have a teacher's guide available on uscurrency.gov for educators that really goes into how to select the unique code for the classroom mode. It also provides all the answers for the algebra equations, but really fun stuff. I did want to note that we also are working on an analog version of cash code breakers that could be played in classrooms that don't have access to computers or high-speed internet. So that will be available in 2022, but we do have available right now the digital version of cash code breakers on uscurrency.gov. So next, I will be going to the Money Adventure mobile app. So this is actually the Federal Reserve Board's first public mobile app. We released it in 2019, I believe, and this was designed specifically for 1st through 6th graders. So the app features a Note Front Explorer and a Note Back Explorer. With the Note Front Explorer, students are able to interact with a virtual $20 bill. Why the 20? Because it's one of the most commonly used denominations in circulation. So with this, if you had the app on your phone and let's say you selected Feel, you could feel the note and your phone would actually vibrate, replicating the raised printing on genuine US currency. If you selected Tilt and you tilted your note back and forth, the color shifting numeral in the corner of the virtual banknote will actually shift colors, again, replicating what you would see if you had an actual genuine $20 bill in your possession. So a really great way to introduce students to US currency. In addition to that, we have a fun Time Traveling Note Back Explorer, where students team up with Buck, the time traveling dog, to save his friend, Professor Bill, who got lost in time through the historical designs on US currency. So it takes students through the historical designs on the back of each banknote. And once they're finished learning about each denomination, they save Professor Bill, and all is well in the money adventure. So really fun. In addition to this, we have companion worksheets that teachers can assign to supplement the learning that takes place within the actual app itself. Then Currency Academy. So Currency Academy is really our online suite of youth ed materials designed for students in 2nd through 5th grade. It primarily touches on 3 buildings. We have the art studio that focuses on the art designs that are on currency. So you'll see that in the top right image here with the flag, the eagle, the Statue of Liberty. There is the science lab, which touches on the security features of US currency. Then the school store, which really touches on the functions of money. The online version, I'll admit, is very text heavy, so this is probably more suited for 4th through 5th graders. However, if you would like to bring this into the classroom, we have a number of lesson plans, animated videos, and printable play money that you could use to walk through these lessons with students. So I think that opens it up more towards the 2nd and 3rd graders as well. And again, these are all available on uscurrency.gov free of charge. Now, last but not least, I did want to share that we have a new material coming soon called Carnival Thrills and Dollar Bills. This is actually our first hard copy material that's catered towards our younger audience. If you think back, everything that I mentioned in this presentation has been digital or online or an app. We do think that it's important to have a hard copy booklet so that younger students can learn about US currency. So with this, the characters will venture through their local carnival, where they will encounter different items that are similar to the features found in US currency. So for instance, I believe at one point in the narrative, they all win color shifting mood rings. And we again take that to relate to the color shifting ink or numerals on denominations 5 and higher on banknotes. So again, great stuff. We are in the final stages of working on this. I believe that it will be complete by the top of 2022. So please stay tuned for more information on Carnival Thrills and Dollar Bills. Last but not least, for those who would like to connect with us, we are on Twitter, Facebook. We do also have a YouTube. If you would like to send us an email, feel free to do so at uscurrency@frb.gov. Again, my name's Asia Thomas. My email is asia.thomas@frb.gov. And if you're interested in signing up for our newsletter, you can do that at uscurrency.gov. And that is all that I have. With that, I will switch it over. Thank you.
Thank you, Asia. This is Gigi Wolf with the Kansas City Fed, and I'm excited to share with you some of our newest resources related to African American banking as well as banking in the U.S. There are 6 resources that I'd like to introduce you to today. Some of them are multimedia, some are lessons, some are activities that we will step through together. The first is a publication that has been published from the Kansas City Fed. It's written by our executive writer and historian, Tim Todd, and highlights institutions that served as vital catalysts for economic opportunity in their communities. Although the war effort eventually brought freedom, access to the nation's established financial system was not readily available. So these banks or institutions helped in the fight against slavery as well as for racial equality. This particular publication highlights the financial institutions that were created, owned, share held by African Americans at a majority level, and how they came to be and their impact on the communities that they served. This particular publication also has a foreword from our bank president, Esther George, who said that community banks are a key mechanism for serving a wide range of borrowers. And that is why it has been especially troubling that the U.S. has seen a continuing downward decline in the number of community banks and a disproportionate reduction in the number of African American community banks. Since 2001, the number of African American banks has declined by more than half. And we also see a large decline in the number of unbanked consumers in African American communities, as reported by the FDIC. Data shows that families and businesses without a local bank potentially fall victim to exploitive practices, like those of alternative financial service providers, fringe services. So this publication, Let Us Put Our Money Together, is a way for us to seek ways to ensure that the equitable access to financial services is available to all Americans. Along with the book, we also have, by the way, that's a picture there of the author, Tim Todd. Again, he's our executive writer and historian who wrote the book. And along with the hard copy publication, as well as a PDF version that you can access on our website, he has produced a podcast called Moving Through History, the Founding of America's First Black Banks. And then you see here a screenshot of a video introduction that's about 2 minutes long that gives you insight about the podcast as well as the book. He states here that there are significant lessons we can learn from history as we look at issues facing the financial system today. Along with the materials that he has produced, I wrote this lesson called Progress Through Parity that ties into the book. It's a classroom-ready tool that accompanies Let Us Put Our Money Together and enables teachers to share these primary source documents, non-fictional text with students as they learn about the unique role of Black-owned banks and how they were developed in the U.S. Students have an opportunity through the lesson to analyze how financial institutions impact their communities. They'll also be able to evaluate how minority depository institutions, or MDIs, support financial equity and opportunity for individuals and businesses. The objectives for this lesson include explaining the role of financial institutions, summarizing how MDIs affect their communities and functioned as economic sources of growth, especially during times of economic recession. They'll also see how, or be able to demonstrate how figures like Maggie Lena Walker and others influence the banking system. They'll be able to compare how minority depository institutions and the first Black-owned and operated banks affected economic equity and social equality. Let's step through the activities now that are included within the lesson. On day one of the lesson, you'll begin with guided questions, encouraging the students to learn to think more about what banks are, how they work, and also answering the essential question throughout the lesson about what the role of banks are in their community. The first activity will be completed in small groups, and they'll be responding to questions about imagining what our world would be like without banks. Where would consumers go to borrow money? What would we do with our savings? how would businesses around our community get capital, or how would they change or differ? What risks might there be for savers and borrowers? And additional questions like those. Continuing on with day one, you'll expose them to primary source documents that are pulled from the book. Here you'll see a picture of the Freedmen's Bank Deposit Book. This is the cover and one of the ledger pages. And you'll point out the details to students, including the name and location of the institution, but also when and how it was incorporated, who Freedmen's Savings and Trust was designed to serve, and the services that they provided as an institution, and how they tracked their deposits. Then additional time for discussion about whether or not students think that Black banks were able to sustain or withstand economic recession, and discussing why they may or may not feel that way. And then answering the question of whether or not Black banks may have fared better than their counterparts in their communities. And during economic recession times especially, you'll find that the book shares that in late 19th and early 20th century, the average lifespan of a bank was around 5 to 8 years, but the average lifespan of an MDI in the US was about 20 years. So you'll discuss those disparities and why they existed. Continuing on, you'll encourage students to think about the functions of a bank as they read an excerpt about bank runs that's pulled from the book. Then students will work in small groups together to look at additional discussion questions that are provided. Some of them pertain to this picture that you see here of the bank that Maggie Lena Walker created. And you'll also learn here about why the book is titled, "Let Us Put Our Money Together." Next, we move into learning about Maggie Lena Walker herself, a little bit more about her, and the bank that she founded. It's called St. Luke's Penny Savings, and she was actually the first woman to ever be the president of a bank of any race. She created St. Luke Penny Savings in Richmond, in Virginia, 1903. And so there's information from the book about learning more about her history and how she came to be the founder of this bank, and how it withstood a lot of economic downturns during its existence. You'll also ask the students to look at the significance of her accomplishments during the early 1900s, and then how the bank that she created might have fared in today's society. The next part here, as you'll see on the map, is looking at minority depository institutions that are located throughout the US, and encourage the students to look at where most of them are located, thinking about why they're located where they are, and then how they function today. Then, as a closing activity for this lesson, students will have the opportunity to create a video or a podcast or some other media-based presentation that answers the question of how do MDIs impact their local economy, as well as in what ways do financial institutions help consumers specifically and businesses within their communities. And the PSAs should last about 1.5 to 2 minutes. And the presentations take up the majority of day 2 of this lesson. The assessment is the final script and the completed PSA. There are a couple of extension activities mentioned as options. And as far as standards correlation, there are ties to both the voluntary national economic standards as well as the Common Core standards related to ELA, literacy, reading, and speaking for 9 through 12. Okay, to order a hardcover copy of the book, you can contact my colleague, Nicole Cole. Classroom sets are available free of charge. Again, there's a PDF version on our website as well. And something that isn't available yet, but you're getting a sneak preview of, of here, is the follow-up book to let us put our money together, called A Great Moral and Social Force. This takes the history of Black banking and moves it forward, covers a span of time up to today, looking at some of the communities where banks played a dual role in establishing both economic opportunity and social equality over time. So some of the stories that are included within this volume, also written by Tim Todd, are located in Richmond, as well as Boley, Oklahoma, Chicago, Illinois, Memphis, Tennessee, and Detroit, Michigan. And it will be available in January, but you can pre-order your copies for free if you'd like, using this link that will be available in the slides that you receive after today's webinar. Here's a picture of one of the stories or the individuals that are highlighted in the book. This gentleman is John Williams. He was a successful automobile mechanic in Tulsa's Greenwood neighborhood, and his business provided the capital for 2 businesses at that time. So you'll learn about his story as well as many others through A Great Moral and Social Force. Next, I'd like to share with you a lesson based on our founding fathers, or just a couple of them in particular, Jefferson and Hamilton, who had varying views about the creation of a central bank, as well as how our central government should work. So students in this lesson get to learn more about the origins of the United States Constitution, compare it to its predecessor, the Articles of Confederation, and then also looking at the differences between those who identified themselves as Federalists and those who consider themselves to be anti-Federalists. The essential question for the lesson is looking at why opinions of the creation of the U.S. Central Bank vary. What is it that they were trying to accomplish in putting together a system that could help combat economic recession, but also serve in other capacities to create economic growth? The objectives for this particular lesson, students will be able to, after going through the lesson, be able to compare and contrast those articles as well as the Constitution, demonstrate an understanding of the ideologies of Federalists and Anti-Federalists, and then defend one of those perspectives as a closing activity. Stepping through the lesson with a little bit more detail here. On the first day, we'll be looking at a couple of videos, help students to learn more about the Articles of Confederation and the U.S. Constitution. Also thinking about who our founding fathers were and some of the opinions they held about how government should work. Then students are introduced to Hamilton and Jefferson. They get to read a little bit more about their stance, and then determine whether or not they fell on the Federalist or Anti-Federalist side of the line. There are plenty of discussion questions throughout after exposing the students to the videos and these reading excerpts. There's additional reading of non-fictional text in looking at a book that's published out of our Philadelphia Fed District about the first central bank of the U.S. And so understanding what the functions of the bank were at that time and how it was structured, and then comparing that to how it looks today. As you can see on the map, there's illustration of how the Federal Reserve System and its respective districts are situated today across the nation, and then comparing those to that first attempt at a central bank, whereas the Federal Reserve, as we know it today, is our third. Next, students will have a chance to take a closer look at how the functions of the Fed today compare to what they were when they were first created in 1913. And then there is, as a closing activity, an opportunity for students to pick one of the sides, a Federalist or an Anti-Federalist, and then defend that point of view, either through a song, rap, poem, or something that they create as a pair to present to the rest of the class. Here is the scoring rubric that's used for both the teachers and the students as they watch the various presentations. And I know I'm running short on time here, so I'll share with you really quickly. There are standards correlations and extension activities for this lesson as well. Another lesson that centers on central banking and Act for the Ages is also available. This lesson focuses more on the Federal Reserve Act itself, what it contains, and how it came to be. It introduces students to the individuals that were key in creating or developing that act and their varying points of view. Students learn about those individuals and the information that they put into their version of the Federal Reserve Act. And then students have an opportunity to look at the current or the existing Federal Reserve Act, the final version, and compare and contrast to what these gentlemen created or suggested be created initially. And then as a closing activity, students get to decide whether or not they would keep the Federal Reserve Act the same as it is today, considering all of the changes that we've seen within monetary policy, and other actions that the Fed has taken to combat recessions. This lesson is also tied to national standards. And there are a couple of more that I know I don't have time to cover today, so that I can give my colleague her time, but they are part of the PowerPoint that you will receive after today's session. And I look forward to you checking those out. And if you have any questions, my information is available here, and you're welcome to contact me or connect with the Kansas City Fed through our website or through our social media channels. With that, I will turn it over to my colleague, Morgan.
Thank you, Gigi. And it's nice to be here this evening with you, or this afternoon. I'm excited to share some of the resources that give some foundational knowledge of the U.S. financial system as far as the role of financial markets and putting money into the bank. So the lessons I'm going to highlight today come from the Dallas Fed. There is 8 in total that are part of the Building Wealth suite of teacher resources. I don't have enough time to share all of the lessons with you this afternoon, but what I'd like to do is highlight 2 of the lessons that have to do with the U.S. banking system. So along with every lesson, it actually comes with a standard presentation slide deck for every lesson. There's also a step-by-step guide or procedure document for teachers that includes copies of all the handouts and the assessments, as well as the answer keys. If you prefer to link individual assignments to a file digitally, each handout and assessment included that I share with you today is available as an individual PDF, and all the student assessments and handouts are fillable. So if you want your students to complete them electronically, they can. So today I want to go ahead and start with lesson 3. It's called Put It in the Bank, where students will compare 2 savings plans, stuffing a mattress full of money or using a bank. So after students identify the disadvantages of maybe stuffing a mattress full of money, students actually have the opportunity to examine different types of banks and how banks act as those financial intermediaries between borrowers and savers. They also get to compare different types of accounts and then learn about compound interest, simple interest, and the rule of 72. So tonight I'd like to go ahead and highlight just a few slides where students will be learning about the role of savers and borrowers as well as banks. So this is a preview of what you might find in the lesson for your students to understand financial markets and the role of banking in the United States. Saving and investing, the lesson 3, Put It in the Bank, really begins with understanding who are the people that are playing the roles in the banking system, which includes savers, banks, and borrowers. So savers are the ones that deposit the money into the bank, and banks lend to those who want to borrow, and borrowers pay interest to the banks who provide the loans. And as well, banks play a double role. They also pay interest back to savers. So the lesson begins with just introducing students to the banking system as a whole. When we think about banks in general in the previous slide, this slide actually helps to define banks further. My experiences in the banking system are quite different from what students experience today. For me, I grew up going to the bank weekly with my parents. It was a traditional brick and mortar bank that had those physical locations. I remember getting a sucker every time I went with my mom when she'd go to deposit my dad's check. Since there was no direct deposit, so direct deposit didn't even exist then. So the experience is nowhere close to the same for my own children. The closest they have been to a bank is a drive-up ATM. I have never brought them into a bank, except for my work one time. My checks are automatically deposited, and their interactions are going to be much different than what I grew up with. So today we have three main types of banks. When we think about those traditional brick and mortar banks, we also have digital banks, and they deliver products and services remotely. And then we also have credit unions, which are nonprofit depository institutions that are owned by its members. So the lesson includes the types of bank accounts as well, such as checking, certificates of deposits, savings, and money market, and some of those characteristics of each, as well as the incentives for savers to put money into a bank. Some of those incentives include interest rates that are paid on savings accounts, the fact that banks are safe and have access to insurance through the FDIC or even the National Credit Union Administration, and they also offer convenience. This might be new information for students who have never been exposed to the banking system. In fact, the most recent report by the Federal Reserve Survey of Household Economics and Decision Making found that 5% of US adults are not even banked. And that means they don't use any traditional form of banking. And only 81% of US adults are fully banked, meaning that they have had a bank account, but sometime in the last 12 months did not use any or did use alternative financial services such as money orders, check cashing, payday loans. So this is an opportunity really to explain to students that although there are incentives for banking, not everyone uses a bank in the US. So the question is, if there's incentives for banking and there are financial institutions in the US who help match savers to investors, why do some people not use banks? There's lots of reasons that maybe your students will give as examples, or maybe even reasons that you've experienced as well. Some of those might include a lack of money to open an account, distrust in the banking system. There might be no banks located close by, or even lack of internet access for online banking. So that also includes like language barriers, little to no exposure, and maybe even some cultural and religious norms. So the lesson really helps to introduce students to the US banking system, and then really dives into some of those advantages of using the banking system. The lesson continues with introducing the role of financial markets, saving and investing, as well as compound and simple interest in the rule of 72. This is really an opportunity for students to see the advantages of saving both early and often and how compound interest works. So this might be the very first step when it comes to participating in the financial markets for students, is understanding the advantages of financial markets. So that was a really high level overview of what's found. I skipped probably 30 different slides that are included, but I wanted to share at the very end of it as an opportunity for students to apply their learning. So in all of the lessons, lessons 1 through 8 for building wealth include handouts or activities that help scaffold that learning for students. At the very end of the lesson, students get to try it on their own. So they get to apply what they've learned. There's a handout called Interest Rates in the Rule of 72, where they start calculating that simple interest, compound interest, and applying the Rule of 72. When we think about the financial markets, it's really a system that helps to channel funds from people who have money that want to save to people in firms and governments who want to borrow. This might be a hard concept for your students to grasp if they've never had a job or participated in financial markets. But lesson 5 is the next lesson I'd like to highlight. It's the role of financial markets. So this lesson begins with how do we define a market? When we think about markets, the financial market helps to channel those funds from people who have the money to people who want to be able to borrow. But that might be a hard concept for students to grasp. So we actually started the lesson with just general markets. So some examples your students might be familiar with include eBay, StockX, or a farmer's market. They might even have examples of items that could be bought and sold in markets, such as Pokemon cards, baseball cards. So for those of you that are participating on the webinar tonight, if you're not familiar with StockX, it's most likely your students are. So StockX is an online marketplace similar to eBay, where consumers can buy and sell sneakers, apparel, electronics. It mimics a stock exchange market where people place a bid or a buy now, and if it matches the place and ask or sell now, the transaction occurs. So StockX actually does all the authentication, shipping and transfer of funds. But really this slide is included in this lesson to get students thinking about how markets behave. We can actually deep dive into how do financial markets work the same way. When we think about financial markets, the lesson obviously starts with examples of markets that might be relevant to students, but financial markets are just like consumer markets. Both facilitate that transaction for people who buy and sell something, and financial markets exist to match savers to investors. However, it is the financial institutions who act as the intermediary between savers and investors who participate in these financial markets. So the lesson continues with introducing different types of financial institutions. In the previous slide, it defined financial institutions as an intermediary between savers and investors, much like eBay and StockX are the intermediaries between buyers and sellers of consumer goods. So the types of financial market or institutions really are consumer banks, commercial banks, as well as investment banks. So when the financial markets match savers to investors, who benefits? This is an opportunity, another brainstorm question for your students to think about what they've learned. Technically, both benefit because they come together to satisfy that need. The brainstorm questions embedded into the presentations actually have an opportunity for students to answer in the guided notes. So what you're looking at right now are the guided notes that go along with each of the lessons. And there really is a spot for them to respond and to reflect on what they're learning. As you can see on the bottom of the slide, there's a space for students to either type their responses or write them in. If you're printing guided notes for students, you can have students take a minute or two to write their answers and then have them share them with the class. Might be a great strategy. I just took a screenshot of the guided notes for tonight's presentation, but the files are available online and you can either print them or have students complete the handouts online. So we know that financial markets match savers with investors. The next part of the lesson is really to show the investment pyramid to your students. This is in their guided notes as well. The answers are in the presentation, which I'll show you in just a moment. But this is a great time to share that the investment pyramid that's in their guided notes really shows the relationship between risk and return. When you're saving and investing, the amount of expected return is based upon the amount of risk you take with your money. Generally, when we look at an investment pyramid, the higher the expected return, the higher the risk of losing money. For less risk, an investor can spend expect a smaller return. We do have an entire lesson in the suite of resources, lesson 7, which is solely dedicated to risk and return if you're looking for an additional lesson to deep dive into this topic. But in the presentation, it gives the answers to the student guided notes. Although students are given a chance to fill in the blanks in their guided notes, the answers are there for students to reflect that if they were to participate in the financial market, maybe save or invest, what would that risk look like? Maybe what would the return look like, and how do you access cash, and what would be the time period that you could save? So the financial markets match savers to investors, but the last part of the lesson focuses on one actionable item students can do when participating in financial markets, and how they can work with the institutions who help facilitate investing in long-term assets or high-risk investment options. We believe that building a strong foundation of goals, budgets, and savings, as well as emergency savings, is critical before investing in long-term assets. So the lesson continues with examples of what could you save for in the short term, as well as emergency savings. So this part of the lesson will help students understand short-term savings needs and emergency savings that come up and start to come up with a plan to address those. And then we break it down a little further. Emergency savings really is the money set aside for those unforeseen events. This might be topics that your students have never had to think about from a financial perspective, but maybe have lived through. The lesson actually ends with a few graphs of the realities of savings in the US. The data on the slide comes from Prosperity Now Scorecard, which is really a comprehensive resource for data on household financial health. They use data from the report from the FDIC to create a heat map of what % of households in the US have saved for emergencies. And according to their findings, only 57.8% of households in the US have saved for emergencies. Savings rates also differ according to race. For example, in the US, only 62.4% of white households and 48.4% of households of color have saved for emergencies. The lesson procedures have a suggestion to have students use that website, Prosperity Now, to research other financial disparities by city, state, and race, and then report back to the class or even answer in an online discussion post, maybe even an exit task, things that they've learned, what surprised them, as well as how they could share the information that they've learned with their family. So at the very end of the lesson, students have the opportunity to apply that knowledge once again. They're taking a look at a fictional high school student's budget, and they need to save for emergencies. So currently, this person, Trey, is saving $0 every single month, but how could they come up with a plan to save for emergencies? All of these resources that I talked about tonight are available for building wealth online. There's 8 new lessons for teachers. Building Wealth also comes as a publication that offers that same foundational knowledge, but really in a reading format. So if you'd like to order copies for your classroom to help supplement maybe some of these lessons that you're teaching about the US financial market, you can also order those free copies. I wanted to thank you for joining this afternoon, and I'm going to go ahead and turn it over to Chris for questions.
Okay, thank you very much, Asia, Gigi, and Morgan. Excellent presentations and information from all of you. Just a couple of questions here, and I'm going to, first, this one is for Gigi. Gigi went, and I think you addressed this, but I just want to give you a chance here to clarify. When we say Black banks, are we saying they were institutions geared toward African American community, or is it ownership of African by African American owners? And I think you addressed that, but maybe just a quick recap of that.
Sure, Chris. Yes, I'm happy to clarify. When we say minority depository institutions, we are saying institutions that are federally insured and 51% or more of their voting stock is minority owned, or 51% or more of their board of directors are minorities.
Okay, excellent. Another question, and this, we can all kind of team up on this one. Does the Fed offer speakers or other in-person opportunities for both teacher, PD, and for students? I will speak on behalf of St. Louis really quickly. Depending on what district you're in, all the banks they do different things. Some have tours. Kansas City, for example, has an excellent tour museum. Jacksonville, our colleague Leslie is here. They have an excellent tour in Jacksonville, Florida. St. Louis, we have a money museum that's not open currently, but we do across the banks have community development events, economic education events, as well as some economic outlook events that are for the general public. And maybe, Asia, could I pick on you for the board and you could speak on their behalf?
Sure. So I would say at the board these last few years, Chair Powell has hosted a teacher town hall event where teachers have been able to come in person and hear from him and also share their experiences in the education industry. And that is also open to the rest of the system as well. So folks are able to live stream in via webinar or web stream. So there are definitely opportunities to have one-on-one conversations with us at the board.
Okay, very good. Morgan, did you want to chime in on those types of things for Dallas?
Yeah, so at the Dallas Fed, we have especially in this virtual environment, our exhibit is still closed to the public, but we have Fed 101 presentations. So we actually have employee ambassadors who go out into high school classrooms to deliver a Fed 101 monetary policy presentation directly to students. And we also have teacher programming in events, whether it's community development or economic education for educators as well.
Excellent. This is kind of a good question. Can you discuss, highlight an intro activity or bell ringer type hook from one of the resources that will get students excited at the beginning of banking, at the beginning of our banking unit? I think that's a good question. And any of you can take that if you'd like.
Chris, I'll go ahead and jump in for us. At a couple of the different lessons, we use like a quiz format of did you know, or data that might be surprising for students who have never been exposed to the banking industry. Most of that research comes from the Board of Governors. So that might be an activity where it opens their eyes to something that they've never thought about. I kind of highlighted that a little bit in my lesson about the realities of savings, but there's a couple different quizzes about even just banking in general. Who banks, who has money to save for emergencies. That might be a hook for students who have never had that conversation with their parents and never really had to think about it of, you know, what's really the financial health of Americans. And that might be a great hook to get students to kind of bring it home and to think about it as an individual level.
Very good. I will confess that when I started my money in banking unit as a high school econ teacher, I used to take a piece of paper and a $10 bill or $5 bill and crumple them both up and pretend to throw them in the garbage. And the students quickly learned the value and the difference between those two pieces of paper. So or realized it, I should say. So there are some different ways to introduce those units. And I'm sure, Asia, you're just cringing at me doing that.
I'm literally over here like, please, no one copy that lesson.
Right. Don't do that. Right. So in our last minute here, I'm just going to share a couple of websites for you. FederalReserveEducation.org is our system clearinghouse for resources, and you can find a lot of the resources discussed this evening on FederalReserveEducation.org. You can also reach out to any of us individually or through your local Fed district or branch if you have a branch near you. Most districts have education specialists, but not all. If you're in a district that doesn't do economic education, don't hesitate to reach out to any of us. Econ Lowdown is our online resource from the St. Louis Fed. We have a lot of resources there as well for the topics we've discussed tonight. And again, any of us are available for you if you have further questions or anything like that. So again, thank you for your attendance. Thank you for all the work you do with your students. And we will be announcing the dates for next year's ECONnections webinars soon. And you found this one, and you'll be able to find next year's in the same way. So check out our websites, and if you have questions, please don't hesitate to reach out. Thank you to the speakers and to my colleagues from the Fed system for helping us put on another successful ECONnections webinar. We'll see you next time.